Camille spent 3 years building a quiet life, never knowing that someone had already decided it needed to end. Not slow down. Not get complicated. End. And the most terrifying part? She did it on her birthday. While she was sitting across from her husband. While our daughter was still for months away from taking her first breath in this world. She sat in that restaurant, watched her eat, and walked out into the Atlanta night like she had not just tried to take everything from her. What she did not know, what nobody in that room knew, was who she actually was. Not who she had become. Who she had always been. There is something people never tell you about justice. They make it sound loud. They make it sound like one big confrontation, one final scene where everything gets said in front of everyone and the person who hurt you finally has nowhere left to stand. But real justice, the kind that holds up in a federal court of law, that is quiet. It is patient. And it waits for exactly the right moment. Her name was Camille Ware. It was the story of how the woman who tried to bury her on her birthday had no idea she was handing her everything she needed to make sure she never hurt anyone again. But Camille's story began much earlier. Camille was 26 years old when she joined the federal service. Fresh out of a graduate program in forensic chemistry at Spelman College, with a thesis on compound tracing enclosed criminal networks that apparently passed through offices she did not know existed until a recruiter called her on a Tuesday afternoon and asked if she had ever considered applied work. She had not. She had planned on a research lab. Good light, enough funding, quiet and honest work. That was the picture she had built for myself. The recruiter talked for 40 minutes. She said yes before he finished. 8 years followed that she cannot describe in full. Pieces of them are still sealed above her clearance to share. What she can tell you is this: she got very good at understanding how things moved through systems they were not supposed to be in. Chemical compounds. Money. People. Information. She learned to trace things all the way back to their origin, no matter how many layers had been built between the source and the surface. She was good at it. Probably too good, because the better she got, the less she was allowed to stop. Then Camille met Corbin. And everything she thought she was building alone started to look different. She wants to welcome everyone watching right now, wherever in the world you are sitting. This story is going to stay with you. So get comfortable, because we are going all the way through. Corbin Ware was not supposed to be a long story. We met at a fundraiser for a community literacy program in Vine City. Her mother had been involved with the organization for years and had pulled a promise from her to show up at least once while she was in Atlanta between assignments. Camille arrived planning to stay 90 minutes. Camille stayed for hours. Corbin ran the construction firm that had donated materials for the program's new building, and he was doing what he always did at events, working the room without appearing to work it. He talked to everyone. He remembered names. He asked questions and then actually listened to the answers, which sounds like a small thing but is genuinely rare. He found her near the back of the room where she was pretending to read a display board, and he said, very simply, "You look like someone calculating the fastest exit." Camille told him he was not wrong. He laughed. Completely unperformed, no effort in it at all. Something about that made her decide to stay a little longer. We talked for 2 hours that night. Camille told him the shape of the work. That she traveled. That she dealt with complicated problems. That she was rarely in one place long enough to grow anything that required tending. He said that sounded lonely. Nobody had ever said that to her before. Not like that. Not like it was simply true and worth naming without apology. Camille flew out the next morning. We exchanged numbers because he asked and she said yes before thinking it through. And then something happened that had never happened to her in 8 years of keeping everything at a careful distance. She thought about him on the plane. Not the work. Not the next assignment. Him. For months of phone calls followed before she was back in Atlanta. He drove to the airport to pick her up when she landed, which she had told him not to do, and he showed up anyway holding a coffee cup with her name spelled wrong on it as a joke, because she had mentioned once that they always spelled it wrong. She was in serious trouble and Camille knew it. 2 years later she was standing in a judge's chamber in downtown Atlanta with her mother crying in the front row and Corbin holding her hands, saying vows he had written himself. And Camille understood for the first time what it felt like to want a life more than she wanted a career. Camille put in her resignation 6 months after our wedding. We had lost a pregnancy at 9 weeks while she was 3 states away on assignment, and she had grieved it alone in a hotel room and gone back to work the next morning because the operation did not pause for personal loss. That was the moment Camille understood something had to change. Not gradually. Completely. Her supervisor did not argue when she set her credentials on his desk. He told her she had given more than most people give in a full career and that the door was never closed. She thanked him, and she meant it, and she walked out into an October afternoon and called Corbin and said she was coming home. Home. Atlanta. The house in West End with the wide back porch and the garden she kept meaning to actually plant things in. 14 months of building something real. Of being present for all of it. Of learning what it meant to wake up in the same place every morning and have that feel like more than enough. Then she got pregnant again. And this time, she was there for every single week of it. That was her life when Bria Kelso walked back into Corbin's world. Camille knew about Bria before she ever saw her. Corbin had been honest with her early. They had been together for almost 3 years, he said. It ended because she wanted something from the relationship that he could not honestly give her, and the longer they stayed in it, the clearer it became that neither of them was going to change enough to make it work. He said it without bitterness and without the careful over-explaining that signals hidden guilt. He said it plainly, and then he moved forward. She had not thought much about her. She was his past, and she did not make a habit of excavating the past of people she loved. What mattered was who Corbin was now, and Camille knew exactly who that was. What she had not fully considered was what the end of that relationship had done to Bria on the inside. She had believed Corbin was going to propose. She had planned around it. She had told people. And when the relationship ended instead, she had to dismantle not just the partnership but an entire version of her future she had already made real in her mind. That kind of loss does not simply hurt and then pass. It reshapes how a person sees the world. It reshapes what they believe they are owed. Camille understood that. She genuinely had empathy for it. What she could not have empathy for was what she decided to do about it. The first time she saw her was at a mutual friend's dinner party 8 months before her birthday. She was warm. Easy to be around. She said all the right things when we were introduced, and she noted it the way she noted everything, filed and held without immediate judgment. There was one moment she almost dismissed entirely. In the middle of a completely unrelated conversation, she asked her what she had done before she left the federal service. Not what she did now. What she had done before she left. That was a specific question. Specific enough that it would stay at the back of her mind for months without urgency, just present. The way a small sound in a wall stays with you before you identify what it is. Camille told her she had worked in research. Compound analysis. True enough, vague enough, and the conversation moved on. But she remembered the question. And she remembered the half-second before she asked it. Camille told myself she was being paranoid. She extended good faith. She should have trusted the question. Corbin made the reservation 3 weeks in advance. He told her to wear something nice and was quiet in the car in the way he got quiet when he cared too much about something going right and was afraid to disturb it by talking. She watched him adjust the mirror once and straighten his collar, and she loved him for how much effort he put into trying to give her a good evening. Seraph was on the 31st floor of a midtown tower. Atlanta was spread out below us, wide and lit. We had a corner table and a single candle between us. The baby had been moving since we left the house, slow and rolling, her particular rhythm, and she had one hand resting on her stomach under the table for most of dinner without consciously deciding to put it there. We talked easily. We ordered well. He gave her a card he had clearly rewritten more than once. The pen pressure changed near the middle where he had slowed down to get a word exactly right, and she held it longer than she needed to because she wanted him to see what it did to her. She was fully present. The way she had been practicing for 14 months. Then Camille looked up and saw Bria near the bar. She did not say anything to Corbin right away. She was his history. People carried old loves for years, and that did not make them dangerous, it made them human. She was not going to let her trained instincts turn a coincidence into a crisis at her own birthday dinner. She spotted us. She came over. She hugged Corbin with the ease of old friends, brief and warm. She turned to her and said happy birthday with exactly enough warmth in the right places. She looked at her stomach, 6 months visible, and said pregnancy suits you, and she smiled when she said it. All of it correct. All of it generous. All of it landing exactly the way it was supposed to. Except for the half second before each thing. She had spent 8 years learning to read the half second before. In that half second, before she said happy birthday, her eyes moved. Not to her face. To the table. To the drinks. To the space around her and back. Fast. Controlled. And it did not belong in that greeting. She filed it. Said nothing. Let her return to her table and turned back to Corbin and made myself stay in the evening, in the candle and the city below us and the baby steady under her hand. When the birthday cake came out, the staff made it warm and festive. Candles. A quiet moment of celebration from the nearest table. And Bria was suddenly there at the edge of it, laughing, helping arrange the plates, making herself part of the moment in a way that felt spontaneous. She set the first slice in front of her herself. Close. Deliberate. The gesture of someone who wanted to be seen doing it. She stepped back smiling. She looked at the cake. The candle. She felt the baby shift once, one slow roll, her particular rhythm. Camille told myself she was being paranoid. She picked up the fork and she ate it. 40 minutes later she could not stand up. The sensation started behind her sternum. It moved outward in a direction that had nothing to do with normal pain. Not the cramping she had been quietly vigilant about throughout the pregnancy. Not anything she had felt before from the inside. But Camille knew it. Camille knew it the way you know something you have studied so completely that it stops being knowledge and becomes instinct. She had spent 18 months on a case involving a compound that had no public documentation. It had appeared in 4 incidents across 2 continents before her unit traced it to a supply chain built and operated by a man named Conrad Beale. She had read every forensic report. She had sat in a cold briefing room and listened to a toxicologist describe the onset, the progression, the specific internal signature of it in precise clinical language, and she had made myself memorize every detail the way she memorized anything that might one day become survival. It was becoming survival right now. The baby moved. One more slow roll. Then stillness. She did not know if that was her settling or something else. She could not afford to think about it yet. She felt Corbin's hand close around her arm. She heard him say her name in the voice that went soft at the edges when something was wrong, and she needed him to stop saying her name and listen. She grabbed his wrist. He went completely still. She said 5 words before the room tilted out from under her. Call Quinton. Right now. Go. Then the floor. Corbin called the ambulance first. Of course he did. He was watching his pregnant wife collapse in a restaurant on her birthday, and the ambulance was the only call a person not trained past it would know to make. He called Quinton Reese second. He misdialed once. His hands were shaking that badly. He did not know who Quinton was beyond a name she had mentioned twice with the careful neutrality she used for things she was not yet ready to explain. He called anyway. Because she had asked him to. Because in 4 years of marriage that had always been enough. Quinton answered before the second ring completed. He asked which hospital. Corbin told him. Quinton said 3 words, she am moving, and the call was over. He was there in 36 minutes. Corbin did not leave her room. He sat in the chair beside the bed and kept his eyes on the monitor. 2 lines on that screen. 2 heartbeats. His and the baby's. He watched both of them the way a man watches something he is terrified of losing and has no instrument to protect except his presence. In the ambulance, before they let him sit beside her, he had been standing in the narrow space near the doors trying to unlock his phone to call her mother. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it twice. The paramedic picked it up for him the second time and he did not even register it. He was looking at her. Not at the phone. At her face. Like if he stopped looking, something would change. He told her that later. He told her that was the moment he understood something had gotten very far past him without his knowing. He told her on the fourth night that the thing he could not stop replaying was not the restaurant floor. It was the thought that came in the ambulance, quiet and devastating. She came from her past. Bria was hers before she was a threat. And whatever she did it because of something that started with her. Camille told him that was not how accountability worked. He said he knew that. He said he knew it with his mind. But his chest had not caught up yet. That was Corbin. Honest even when honesty cost him something. Quentin identified himself to the attending physician 9 minutes after he arrived. He provided specific clinical information about what he believed had been administered, information that existed nowhere in any standard toxicology reference because the compound had never been publicly documented, and watched the treatment protocol shift before he finished his second sentence. The neonatologist was paged within the hour. 2 heartbeats on the monitor. Mine and the baby's. Both present. Both holding. For 11 seconds after the neonatologist first reviewed the readings, nobody in the room said the word heartbeat. Corbin stood at the foot of the bed with his hand pressed flat against the rail, not moving, not breathing, watching the doctor's face for information his training had not given him how to read. Those 11 seconds were the longest of her marriage. Then the doctor said both are stable, and Corbin sat down in the chair like the word stable had physically removed something from his legs. Quentin stood in the hallway outside her room and started building the case. He pulled the restaurant footage within 2 hours of arriving. The 24-minute window covering Bria's movement through the birthday celebration was gone. Not corrupted. Deleted. Cleanly, deliberately, by someone with system access and enough technical knowledge to do it without leaving obvious traces. That told Quentin everything he needed to know about whether this had been planned in advance. It had been planned carefully. The second thing he found was a woman in scrubs who had entered her room 3 times in the first 7 hours. Her first 2 visits were unremarkable enough that the floor nurse had not flagged them. On the 3rd visit she asked for questions about her symptom progression that were too precise, too narrowly focused on the exact compound involved, to belong to someone working from general medical curiosity. She was not on the hospital staff roster. She was not in the visitor log. She had walked into her room, gathered intelligence on her condition and the baby's status, and walked back out. They were still watching from the outside. While her husband sat beside her bed counting 2 heartbeats on a monitor. Quentin had an emergency federal warrant by 5 in the morning. Her room was reclassified as restricted access by 5:30. And he placed a call to his supervisor that activated a full communications review on Conrad Beale's federal facility in Pennsylvania. Beale had been inside for 3 years. His network was supposed to be gone. 14 arrests. 11 convictions. Supply chain dismantled. The communications review came back in 40 hours. He had never stopped. Conrad Beale built his network on one principle: never be the most visible person in any room. He was not someone you noticed immediately. He was patient and strategic, and he understood that the most durable kind of power is the kind that cannot be seen. For 11 years he had found people with unhealed wounds, handed them stories and reasons and directions, and built loyalty out of the specific gratitude that comes from feeling like someone finally understands your pain. She had been the one who pulled hardest on the thread that unraveled him. 16 months as lead forensic specialist on his case. She identified the compound. She traced the supply chain through 4 countries and 2 shell structures. She helped witnesses find language for what they knew when they were too frightened to find it on their own. She testified for 4 days at trial. Beale sat across that courtroom every day of those 4 days and looked at her with an expression she had documented in her own case notes as the most disciplined hatred she had observed in a defendant who understood how to manage his face. He received his sentence. He said nothing. He was transported and assigned to his federal facility, and he began, from inside it, doing the only thing he had ever been genuinely gifted at. He waited. He found the right wound. He handed someone a story. And then he sent a message that his handler recorded on the facility's monitored line. Quentin played it for her on the 3rd day, holding his phone close so only she could hear. 7 seconds. Beale's voice, flat and completely certain. He said, "She left the work. The work does not leave her." No anger. No elaboration. Just the calm, patient certainty of a man who had been planning something for 3 years and believed he had already won. He had found Bria Kelso through layers, through people who knew people, through the slow accumulation of information about a woman still carrying a loss she had not put down. He had offered her something that felt like power and looked like justice and was actually neither. He had told her just enough to make her believe she was acting for herself. He had not told her who she was. He had not told her what she was walking into. And he had made one catastrophic miscalculation. He had assumed that Camille Ware, 14 months out of the field, 6 months pregnant, sitting at a birthday dinner with her husband, was no longer the woman who had dismantled his network. She was still exactly that woman. She had just been waiting, without knowing she was waiting, for a reason to be her again. Camille told him on the 4th night. Not everything. There are things that remain classified above her ability to share, and Corbin understood this not because she gave him a detailed explanation but because he had married a woman who kept certain rooms closed and had chosen to trust her with those rooms rather than demand entry into them. That kind of trust is not passive. It is a daily decision. She had never once taken it lightly. Camille told him the shape of 8 years. The miscarriage she had grieved alone in a hotel room in a city she cannot name in any conversation, gone back to work the next morning because the operation did not pause. The moment Camille understood something had to change, not gradually, not eventually, but completely. Camille told him about Beale. The case. The 4 days of testimony. What Beale's face had looked like across that courtroom. Camille told him about Bria. What Quentin had traced. What it all connected to. When she finished, Corbin was quiet for a long time. Not the stillness of a man shutting down. The stillness of a man holding something large and deciding to hold it without dropping any piece of it. Then he said, "She keep thinking she did this because of her." She said, "She did it because someone found her pain and handed her a direction." That is not the same thing as you. He said, "She know that." He said it the way a person says something they understand with their mind but have not yet felt their way to in their chest. She let it sit there between us. She was not going to rush him past real feeling to get to the tidier version of it. Then he looked at the monitor. Both lines still steady. Both heartbeats present. He said, "The baby." Not a question. A statement of what mattered most before anything else could be addressed. Camille told him the neonatologist had used the words remarkably resilient. That she had written them in the notebook on her nightstand the same night because she was already saving them for later. Something moved across his face that she had only seen twice before. Once the night we lost the first pregnancy. Once the morning Camille told him she was pregnant again. He put his face in his hands. 1 breath. 2. Then he looked at her and said, "What do you need from her?" Not what should he do. What did she need from him? She had been with this man for 4 years and he could still stop her. She said, "Stay here." Let her close it. He took her hand. He stayed. Bria Kelso had not slept properly in 5 days. She had looked for a death notice. She had looked for a news report. She had found nothing, and she had tried to let that mean what she needed it to mean. She could not make it mean that. She was standing in her kitchen in East Atlanta at 7:30 in the morning when the knock came. She opened the door. Quinton Reese was on the doorstep with his credentials out and 2 agents behind him and a uniformed officer at the base of the steps. She saw all of that. She heard him begin to speak, the formal words, the ones that arrive already carrying weight and consequence. Then she saw her. She was standing slightly behind Quinton, off to his left. Not in any official capacity. She was wearing a dark coat over clothes she had put on that morning without ceremony, because she had not come to perform anything. She had come because she needed to be present when this closed. Because 8 years of that work had taught her that you do not send someone else to finish the thing that belongs to you. Bria had looked at her across a birthday dinner 6 days ago and read her as settled. As soft. As a woman who had stepped back from whatever she had been before and become something smaller. She was reading her very differently now. She was watching her the way she watched the last step of something complete itself. No anger built for the moment. No triumph being displayed. Just the calm, level attention of a woman who had done a job all the way through to its end. She watched her face move through several things quickly. The formal words Quinton was saying were reaching her at a distance, the way sound reaches a person when the ground has already shifted beneath them. She was somewhere inside the full weight of what she had actually been part of. Then her face changed in a way she had not expected. It was not shame in the ordinary sense. It was something worse than shame. It was the specific look of a person who has just understood that the choice they believed was finally theirs, the thing they believed they were doing for themselves, was never theirs at all. Every decision she thought she had made freely had been placed in front of her by someone who needed her to make it. She had not been acting out of love. She had been someone else's instrument the entire time. She said, very quietly, she did not know what she was part of. She said, she know that. 3 words. No warmth in them and no coldness. The truth, simply acknowledged, by a woman who had already accounted for it and moved past it to everything it connected to. She had made sure Bria's full situation was in the federal record. Not out of pity. Because it was accurate, and accuracy was the standard she had held for 8 years and she was not going to lower it now. The officer came up the steps. Quinton finished speaking. And Bria Kelso stood in her doorway and understood, fully and finally, that she had been found in her grief by a man she had never met and handed a story designed to end a woman she had never truly known. She had believed she was finally doing something. She had been someone else's instrument the entire time. And the woman she had been pointed at had known it before anyone told her. Conrad Beale received additional federal charges 72 hours later. The investigation building around his facility had been running quietly for 11 months before the night of her birthday. What he arranged at that restaurant did not create the case against him. It closed it. It gave the follow-on work the final operational thread connecting the infrastructure still running inside a network everyone had been told was finished. He had overreached. And the woman he reached against was the one person best positioned to recognize exactly what he had done, why he had done it, and precisely how to prove all of it. Bria cooperated fully. Her attorney built the argument, correctly, that she had been deliberately identified, targeted, and manipulated by people who understood her vulnerability and exploited it with precision. The federal prosecutor reviewed every piece of it carefully. Cooperation was not immunity. But it was the difference between what Bria had actually known and what the people using her had known, and that difference mattered in that courtroom. She had made sure it was there, in the record, because it was the truth. Our daughter arrived on a Wednesday morning in April. 11 days early. She had privately suspected she would not wait for a scheduled date because she had been paying attention to her movements for months and had formed the informal conclusion that she was a person who would make her own timeline and expect the world to keep up. She was right. Camille arrived with the complete certainty of someone who had decided the time was now. Corbin cried. He stood beside the bed and he cried in the full, unheld way of a man feeling something enormous who has decided the appropriate response to enormous things is to feel them without apology. She watched him and said nothing and loved him in the way she had always loved him, privately and completely and without needing to perform it for anyone else. She cried later. Alone, in the 10 minutes he took her into the hallway to meet his mother. Brief. Complete. Entirely hers. Then she looked at the ceiling of that hospital room and thought about everything that had happened in the 4 months since a birthday dinner in Midtown. The restaurant floor. The ambulance. The monitor with 2 lines on it. Corbin dropping his phone in that narrow space near the ambulance doors, hands shaking too badly to hold anything. The doorstep in East Atlanta at 7:30 in the morning. The moment Quinton played her 7 seconds of Conrad Beale's voice and Camille understood, all the way down, that she had never fully stopped being who she was trained to be. She had just been living somewhere else for a while. Corbin came back into the room carrying our daughter with the careful, reverent terror of a man holding something irreplaceable for the first time. He sat on the edge of the bed. He held her so she could see her face. She looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "Hey." 1 word. Soft. The most unguarded thing she had said in longer than she could measure. Her eyes moved toward the sound. And Camille understood something in that moment that she had not been able to put language to until right then. She had survived before she met her. She had survived 8 years of work that did not stop for grief or exhaustion or personal loss. She had survived a restaurant floor, a hospital bed, and every quiet, terrible hour in between. But this, looking at her face for the first time, was the first time survival had ever felt like a gift. Not a result. Not a conclusion. A gift. Something handed to her by every hard thing she had ever refused to let finish her. She never announced who she was to anyone in that restaurant on the night of her birthday. She never needed to. The people who needed to find out found out. And the man who spent 3 years planning to make sure she could not finish what she started handed her, through his own impatience, everything she needed to make certain he never arranged anything again. That is the thing about people who have become something real through years of quiet, unglamorous work. They do not walk around reminding the room. They do not need recognition to know what they are capable of. They simply are what they are, and when the moment comes, the moment knows it. If this story found you today, she wants to hear from you. Drop something in the comments. Tell her where you are watching from. Tell her which part of Camille's story stayed with you the longest. If you are not subscribed yet, do that now. Every story on this channel is built the same way this one was, with care, with intention, and all the way through to the end. She will see you in the next one.